This November, America has a choice to make. Will it be voting red for Trump or red for socialism? Today we are joined by Senior Editor-at-Large for Breitbart News, Joel Pollak, and author of Red November. Will the country vote red for Trump or red for socialism? Thank you so much, Joel, for joining me today.
Thanks, and I apologize for doing this from the car. We had an internet outage at my house, and of course everybody's working from home, so here we are.
Perfect, not a problem. So I just want to jump right into this with a question that really pertains to the theme of your book, and that is, what is the cause of the Democrat Party going farther left than we've seen in its entire history?
Well, there are a number of causes. Some of them are long-term and some of them are short-term. So the long-term causes have a lot to do with academia, Hollywood, creating a cultural monopoly for the left in these institutions and training successive generations of American youth to think that the left is really where they want to be politically. And that's taken some time, but it's also going to take a lot of time to undo. The shorter term is the particular dynamics of this presidential race. And I talk about that in Red November, how when Trump was elected, the Democrats basically rejected the legitimacy of his election. And the centrists in the Democratic Party were completely shell-shocked. Hillary Clinton and her whole universe could not accept that they'd lost. And they were the ones, ironically, who went in for these crazy conspiracy theories like Russia collusion and so forth. Ironically, the far left of the party, the Bernie Sanders wing, they had more of a handle on why Trump won. They understood it was real because he was talking to working class voters. There were Sanders supporters in places like Michigan who voted for Trump because of trade and other issues. So they were less surprised, even though probably just as outraged by Trump winning. And they hit the ground running. They were much more organized when it came to picking up the pieces after 2016. So they tended to dominate. And I described the process of how they mobilized their supporters in 2017, 2018. They brought people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to the fore, and they started dominating policy debates inside the Democratic Party. So by the time you get to the presidential election in 2019, things that are just taken for granted inside the Democratic Party are wildly out of tune with where the rest of America is. I mean, it started with giving free healthcare to illegal aliens, which every candidate raised their hand for on that first Miami debate stage on the second night. And now it's with defund the police. I mean, defund the police has basically become the default position of the Democratic Party, but it's opposed by more than 2/3 of Americans. So the party is very far to the left.
Right. And as the Democrat Party goes farther to the left, what is your take on the Republicans? What is the response going to be from Republicans? Do you think they're going to become more conservative, or do you think they're going to start inching towards the left?
So it depends what happens. I think Republicans have become more committed to President Trump. This idea that the left is rising, is aiming at a kind of second American revolution, has really consolidated support behind the president, because even if you don't like Trump, you have to fight back. And I think that the Never Trumpers are a very small faction. They're smaller than they ever were. They've been exposed as basically being Democrats. They're campaigning for Democratic Senate candidates. They've said they're going to punish Trump supporters after Joe Biden wins, if Joe Biden wins. So the Republican Party doesn't have a lot of dissent anymore. It's really come together around Trump. But it remains to be seen if they can still turn out the vote in an environment where a lot of people are just afraid. And they're afraid to talk to pollsters. They're afraid to organize. So we'll see what happens. If Joe Biden wins the election, I think you'll see a split in the Republican Party, because some people will simply withdraw. There'll be a sense in which they try to accommodate to the new order. And it's going to be a completely new order. I mean, Joe Biden's talking about what he calls, this is a quote, revolutionary institutional changes. And we know what those are going to be. They're already promising to do amnesty on the first day. They're going to wipe out the Senate filibuster. They're going to legalize 11 million illegal aliens, give them citizenship and voting rights. Most are going to vote for Democrats. They're going to add one, maybe two states, including the District of Columbia and possibly Puerto Rico, which is going to be 2 or 4 permanent Democratic senators, making it almost impossible for Republicans to win a majority again. They're going to pack the courts. They're talking about adding justices to the Supreme Court and then filling them with liberal judges so they can undo President Trump's appointments. So all of this is in the works, and they're going to move toward Medicare for all, the Green New Deal. These are radical changes to our society that Joe Biden is now promoting, and some Republicans will resist. Some Republicans will go into a kind of internal exile. They're just not going to be able to stand up to this. I think people are going to try to find some way. We've seen that in California. You have little pockets of resistance, if I can use that word, little pockets of resistance to the one-party state that California has become, and a lot of other people just leave. Well, now you can't leave America, so people will just check out of public life, out of economic life. I mean, the environment for investing has become a lot worse because of these riots. And if Joe Biden comes in promising to raise taxes and to end the Keystone Pipeline and to give all this stuff away to people in the name of racial justice and all this nonsense, then you're going to see a diminution of American public life, politically, economically, socially. And Republicans will still win in small places, but it's going to be a lot harder. You also have a census year coming up, and Democrats will redistrict as much as they can if they win state legislative seats. So it's going to be pretty dark. And that's why I think Republicans, if they're serious about holding on to America as we know it, never mind holding on to power, they're going to have to get their act together. They're going to have to fight very, very hard to keep Joe Biden and the Democrats out of power.
Yeah, and you mentioned the plan that might unfold if Joe Biden is elected. The lawlessness that we've been seeing in the past couple weeks in Portland, in Seattle, do you think if he's elected, do you think that's going to appease these crowds? Or do you think the violence and the riots that we're seeing and just kind of this lawlessness increase if he becomes president?
Well, I think it's going to increase for the simple reason that if you reward the left by giving them political victory after they've rioted and after they've obstructed the president, impeached the president, spun all kinds of conspiracy theories, all of the things they've done really ought to be punished. These are not things that healthy democracies do. So they ought to lose. And Trump really should get a second chance. I mean, if you look at the Michael Flynn prosecution, how they undermined his administration from the very beginning, they didn't let him implement his foreign policy. They got the deep state to disobey him, rebel, leak. I mean, they basically tried to sabotage the administration. He almost deserves a second chance. But if they win, they're going to feel like it was all worth it. And then every time they have any kind of political grievance, they're going to do the same thing. It worked the last time. Why not do it again? So I think in an ideal world, in a just world, Democrats would be taught a lesson through political defeat. If they win, there's going to be more of this. Maybe it settles down for a little while because they got their way. A lot of this is really just about trying to get Joe Biden into office. I mean, the teachers' unions who are resisting going to school, there are some people who are genuinely afraid of getting the coronavirus, but there's no real documented case of a child transmitting the virus to a teacher. I suppose it could happen, but it's not really a huge risk. It can be managed. But I think a lot of what the teachers' unions are doing in resisting any attempt to go back to school in some of these Democrat-run cities and states is they're just holding out for the election. They're going on a kind of general strike. That might be alleviated somewhat if Biden wins, but it's going to be around forever. We're going to become like France, where they have strikes anytime the left doesn't get what they want. We're going to become like South Africa, where the economy shuts down for days at a time because one union or another wants to extract something from the electorate, from the taxpayer. It's really a bad way to go. I think if Joe Biden wins after what the left has done, it's going to become hugely disruptive. Now, if Donald Trump wins, there'll be protests, there'll be rioting and so forth. But I think people will reset and they'll start looking toward the future. They'll give Trump a chance to govern, not because they have any goodness left in their hearts, really, but because possibly Nancy Pelosi will be defeated or ousted by her own party. And the Democrats will start looking toward 2024. They'll get over Trump. The election will no longer be about Donald Trump. 2024 will really be about the future, and we can have perhaps a more productive political debate, even if it's just as divided.
Right, and as we look towards the future, and you mentioned the different groups that really are starting to influence the Democrat Party and the Democrat policies, one of these groups that we're seeing emerge are Zoomers and the younger generation of Democrat voters. And all over the internet during the primaries, I would see people on Instagram and TikTok I mean, practically pleading, please don't make me vote for Joe Biden. I mean, this was the last person they wanted to vote for because they were so stuck on Bernie. But my question is now looking at Biden, and he's coming out with all of these policies. How different are Biden's policies from Bernie's in reality?
The differences are smaller and smaller every day. And in fact, today, Joe Biden proposed a policy to pay for child care and elder care. Now, Trump has a policy on child care. He actually introduced it in the State of the Union address, and it was revenue neutral. It wasn't spending new money. Trump proposed paying for child leave and child care by allowing people to get paid early for their child tax credits from future years. So you could bring that money forward and use it for child care or parental leave. And Democrats said no. Not all the Democrats. Actually, in the Senate, there was a bipartisan bill. Kristen Sinema from Arizona, who's one of the few remaining moderate senators on the Democratic side, she did a bipartisan bill. But House Democrats said absolutely no. And Joe Biden is proposing to pay for it with new taxes. And where is he going to get this new tax money? They're going to start taxing real estate. And this is an idea that came from Bernie Sanders, that Bernie Sanders proposed a 25% tax on real estate transactions that don't involve your primary residence. That was an idea right out of the left that we want to encourage, or rather to discourage, speculation in real estate. We're going to tax 25%. And Biden's proposal is similar to that. Basically, he said we're going to eliminate the tax deductions you get for capital gains on selling homes that aren't your own, that aren't your primary residence. So they're going to clamp down on people who make money by buying and selling homes. That's a massive blow to the American housing and construction industry. So this is the guy who gets up there and he says this rhetoric about good union jobs. But the good union jobs are in construction, housing, oil pipelines, transportation, Teamsters, driving, machinists. All of those jobs are threatened by Biden's proposals, but he's basically just taken something out of the book of Bernie Sanders. And the reason he's done it is the reason you suggested earlier. All these young people on TikTok and social media saying, don't make me vote for Joe Biden. Biden's chasing after them. There's a huge enthusiasm gap. Trump has a lot of enthusiastic support on his side among his base. Biden does not. And so he's trying to make sure that Bernie Sanders people stay engaged. That's their central preoccupation. And that's why they keep moving further and further to the left. And they talk about transforming the country. That's not what the country wants. It might be what young people want because they don't know any better, but the country actually wants stability. The country wants to return to economic growth, to certainty, to order, to peace. And Biden is supposed to be the guy to offer that. I mean, that's how he started his campaign. But Biden is now basically running as a kind of knockoff version of Bernie Sanders, and he's doing it to try to appeal to that base. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's definitely sending alarm signals to conservatives and independents who are now looking at this and saying, wait a minute, they're offering us Biden, but we're getting Sanders.
Wow. Yeah, very, very interesting. And so one of the other big themes of your book, it mentions in the description how this is kind of a travelogue, and I remember looking back and watching an interview or a debate, I guess, between you and a polar bear. And so you being on the ground and really scoping out and talking to people and seeing what's going on during these Democratic primaries, what are some things that you discovered behind the scenes that the establishment media never picked up on and reported that people should know?
That polar bear interview was rather memorable.
Very memorable.
Yeah. I mean, the most interesting thing was really how the establishment media is covering up Joe Biden's frailty. And I'll tell you how that cover-up happens in two ways. First of all, we went to 11 or 12 debates. I think it was 11. And there's a spin room after every debate. And almost every candidate comes to the spin room and talks to the journalists, at least once. I interviewed Bernie Sanders in the spin room. He wasn't there all the time, but he was there some of the time. Elizabeth Warren came from time to time, Kamala Harris. Pete Buttigieg would come to the spin room, but he wouldn't talk to the journalists. He just talked to the anchors on news shows, prearranged interviews. He didn't take spontaneous questions, but at least he showed up. Joe Biden never once came to the spin room. You could not ask him a question. He would not answer a spontaneous question from a journalist in the spin room. I think that's partly because he was afraid of gaffes, but also because it was just too late. It was past his bedtime. And the media didn't really report on that. They also tried to hush up what Democrats themselves were asking about when it came to Joe Biden's fitness for office. I mean, in the Houston debate, I think it was, in September 2019, Julian Castro said that Joe Biden had trouble remembering something he had said 2 minutes before. And the audience kind of gasped, but everybody knew what he was talking about. And in the spin room afterward, Cory Booker said, it's a real concern. It's a real legitimate question. And that was just never brought up again. And there were other weird episodes like Joe Biden having a burst blood vessel on a CNN town hall on climate change. I mean, these things happened and they're going to impact the way people vote, or they ought to be impacting the way people vote, because after all, if it was legitimate to talk about John McCain's age in 2008, it's certainly legitimate to talk about Joe Biden's age. He's older than McCain was and in poorer health. So I think that's one of the big cover-ups. The media just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, even today, it's been, I don't know how many weeks since Joe Biden has taken questions after all of these little pressers that he's done. And it's absolutely incredible sometimes to see how the media attacks Trump for being on camera and talking to the media, yet there's no accountability when it comes to Joe Biden taking questions. My last question for you is just the messaging of this whole 2020 election, the whole freedom versus socialism. Do you think that message is going to be effective for President Trump coming up?
Yes, I think it's effective. It's necessary, but not sufficient. What I mean is Trump has to draw that contrast. It's not hard to draw. The Democrats are helping him do it. He also, however, has to offer a positive vision. So it's not going to be enough just to say, you have to avoid the terrible future that Joe Biden and the Democrats are going to bring about. You have to avoid a president who's not going to be in control of his own administration. You have to avoid radicals who are tearing down statues. All of that's important. But you also have to say where you're taking the country. And I think Trump has to make the case that we need to finish what he started. We need to build the wall, finish the wall. We need to decouple from China. Joe Biden will reverse that. He's buddy-buddy with China, sweetheart deals for his family with Chinese government investment funds. He's going to reverse what has to happen, which is a decoupling from China. You've got to complete the process of the peace agreements in the Middle East, Israel, Palestinians, keep Iran isolated, make sure they don't become a nuclear power. You've got to rebuild the economy, but without raising taxes and reorganizing everything. Keep the Keystone Pipeline, keep the American energy industry. Just keep things going in the direction that Donald Trump was putting them. Donald Trump made incredibly important changes to American economic policy, American trade policy, American foreign policy, and all of those were necessary. So necessary that Democrats didn't talk about them much. I mean, the issue of trade never even came up really in the Democratic primary, except they were bashing the tariffs on China, which tells you where the Democrats want to take us. They want to take us back into this kind of almost colonial relationship with China where we're being colonized by that empire. But you got to finish what Trump started, and you can't do that if Joe Biden gets elected. I think Nikki Haley actually said it this week. If Joe Biden's elected, all the progress in foreign policy just gets thrown away. So I think Trump's message has to be freedom versus socialism, and also finish what we started.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joel, for coming on and talking to us today. I'm excited to read your book and get more of these insights behind what it's like on the ground, because not a lot of people get to see it now, especially with this whole COVID-19 thing going on. You know, it's very rare that people are able to be on the ground and experience it for themselves. So books like yours are important.